My parents demanded I move back home and pay rent to them while supporting my jobless sibling. I refused and went no contact. I, 29 female, can't say my childhood was completely miserable, but there were always strange power dynamics at home. My father had a way of making everything about control, while my mother believed that loyalty meant obeying every family rule without question. Their approach might have stemmed from cultural traditions or their own upbringing, but it left little room for individuality. After I graduated high school, I decided to move out and rent a small apartment in a nearby city. Nothing fancy, just enough space for me and my basic furniture. I found a stable job at a local retail chain, working my way up to a managerial role. The pay wasn't extravagant, but it covered rent, food, and allowed me to stash a modest amount in savings. Compared to the uncertain atmosphere in my parents' home, I felt a new sense of freedom. Whenever I visited for the holidays, I'd experience a rush of gratitude that I had carved out a little independence for myself. My sibling, who's a couple of years younger, stayed behind. All throughout high school, my siblings showed little interest in studying or planning a career path. I honestly felt bad for them at first, thinking maybe they just needed more time to figure things out. But by the time they reached their early 20s, they still hadn't managed to land a consistent job. Mother and father never pressed the issue too hard. They believed my sibling was sensitive or still searching for the right opportunity. So while I was forging a life on my own, my sibling relied on my parents for almost everything: food, phone bills, gas money for the occasional friend hangout. Things took a drastic turn earlier this year. My father started calling me more often, always with a hint of urgency in his voice. At first, I thought maybe they were having health problems or some major crisis at home. Whenever we did speak, he dropped subtle hints. "It's so lonely here. We're not getting any younger, and your sibling is still figuring things out." My mother would chime in, "Wouldn't it be nice if we had both our kids under one roof again?" They'd bring up anecdotes from my childhood, how I'd help in the kitchen or run errands. It felt manipulative, but I tried to chalk it up to parental worry. Then, without warning, I got an official-sounding text from my father. "We need to have a serious talk about your future with this family. Come over on Sunday." My gut tightened. The wording was stern, almost like a summons. Trying to be a dutiful daughter, I arrived at my parents' place that Sunday afternoon. Mother welcomed me inside, all smiles, offering me tea and homemade cookies. My sibling was watching TV in the living room, looking carefree and throwing a casual wave my way. When we settled at the kitchen table, father cleared his throat. "We've been thinking," he began, "it's time for you to move back in. This place is too big for just us, and your sibling needs support." I sat there stunned. It wasn't a gentle invitation or a question. It was a statement of what they believed should happen. "What do you mean, move back in?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. Mother clasped her hands together. "We want you to come home, help with expenses here, and maybe contribute a bit extra to support your sibling. Times are hard, and they haven't been able to find stable work. We'd all benefit." She offered a warm smile, as though this was an obvious solution that would make everyone happy. The sheer entitlement took my breath away. I was managing fine on my own. I had no intention of returning to a household where every step could be monitored and judged. Also, it wasn't like I didn't care about my sibling. But they were an adult, perfectly capable of working if they chose to. It felt absurd that I, the older child, was expected to uproot my life just to pay rent to my parents while simultaneously bankrolling my sibling's unemployed lifestyle. I tried to respond calmly. "I don't see why I should do that. I'm settled where I am. I have a job and bills of my own." My father's expression hardened. "Your sibling needs you. We need you. You can't just keep living on your own when your family is struggling." He sounded offended, as if my independence was a direct insult to their household. I glanced over at my sibling, hoping maybe they'd speak up or show some appreciation. But they just shrugged, eyes still glued to the TV. That casual dismissal only fueled my frustration. I turned back to my father. "I understand you might want help, but why should I pay rent to my own parents while also supporting someone who won't work?" Silence filled the kitchen. Mother pursed her lips, father looked like he was about to explode, and my sibling simply changed the channel. Before I left that day, father insisted that we continue this conversation soon. He even suggested I consider the benefit of living at home, free meals, some sense of security, and unity. The subtext, however, was clear. He wanted me under his thumb again. Mother, ever the enabler, mentioned how family is supposed to sacrifice for each other. That phrase lingered in my mind long after I drove away, tears of frustration threatening to spill the entire ride back to my apartment. Little did I know that was only the beginning. In the days following that bizarre Sunday meeting, my father launched a relentless phone campaign. He called every evening with new arguments about why I should do the right thing and come home. Don't be selfish, he'd say. You owe us for raising you. One time, he even threatened to cut me out of any future family inheritance if I didn't comply. An ironic threat, given I'd never factored potential inheritance into my plans. Mother took a different angle, emotional guilt. She would start each call with a trembling voice, describing how my sibling was depressed, lonely, or misunderstood, and how I was the only one who could help. You have a decent income, she pleaded. Why not share it with your family instead of throwing it away on rent somewhere else? She conveniently ignored the fact that rent is exactly how one maintains a roof over their head. The more they pushed, the more I felt my own resentment simmer. This wasn't a request for family bonding. It was an ultimatum disguised as an invitation. And worst of all, my sibling didn't seem to care. In one bizarre phone call, Father tried to put my sibling on the line so they could personally appeal to me. But when I heard my sibling's voice, it was casual and uninterested. Hey, if you come back, we can hang out or whatever. It's just easier if we're all in one place, you know. As if my entire life was a convenience store they wanted me to run. That same week, I visited a close friend who knew about the rocky history with my parents. As we drank tea in her cozy living room, she asked, "Why do they need your money so badly? Are they in financial trouble?" I shrugged. They're not broke. They own the house outright, and Father has a steady job. But they've always expected me to contribute something more, like a duty. And now they want me to support my sibling, who does nothing. She looked concerned. Do you think they'll back off if you stand your ground? I exhaled slowly. I doubt it. They're not the type to let go. They think they're entitled to my income because they raised me, and they see my sibling's unemployment as my responsibility too. Saying it out loud made me realize just how toxic it had become. Sure enough, that evening the phone buzzed again. Mother, this time, we're having a family gathering next week. It's important that you come and talk this out with everyone. My gut told me it would be a trap, but I agreed. I wanted to at least hear them out in person one last time, or perhaps set firm boundaries. The gathering was held in our old living room, the curtains drawn and the atmosphere thick with unspoken tension. Father, mother, and sibling were seated as though they'd been waiting to ambush me. After the initial small talk, Mother asked if I'd eaten, sibling yawned. Father cleared his throat and got straight to business. We've decided you'll move back next month. We'll figure out the rent arrangement, but you'll pay us directly, and you'll also contribute a share toward your siblings' living expenses. My jaw tightened. Excuse me? You've decided. I repeated the words as if they were absurd. And they were. Mother nodded. Yes, dear. Your sibling has tried applying for jobs, but it's tough out there. We can't carry all the burden alone. Your family, so it's only fair you pitch in. My siblings sat there, tapping away on their phone, looking vaguely bored. I turned toward them. Have you really been looking for jobs? They shrugged. Kind of. That shrug lit a fire in me. I directed my attention back to my parents. I'm not moving back. I have my own place. I have a job. I'm doing fine. Father's eyes flashed. You are being disrespectful. We raised you, we gave you everything, and now you just turn your back on us. His voice cracked with anger, and I felt my heartbeat quicken. It spiraled into a heated argument. Father accused me of abandoning family values. Mother brought up how other relatives supposedly took care of each other without question. My sibling rolled their eyes, insisting they would have a job by now if only the economy wasn't so tough. After about 30 minutes of them ranting, I stood up. You're demanding money from me in exchange for what? A life of being under your control? If my sibling wants help, they can start by finding some real responsibility. This is not my problem. I left that living room determined to stand my ground. But I sensed something bigger brewing under their surface politeness. A suspicion nagged me that they weren't just going to drop the matter. And I was right. Within a week, the situation escalated more than I thought possible. My father, furious at my defiance, decided to show up unannounced at my apartment with my mother in tow. They knocked on my door as though it was a police raid. Confused and alarmed, I let them in, not wanting to cause a scene in front of my neighbors. They marched straight into my living room, glancing around as if to assess whether I was living some sort of extravagant lifestyle. Then Father proclaimed, "We've talked to the rest of the family. They agree you should be helping us." He said it with a smug finality, as though a jury had rendered its verdict. Mother folded her arms, nodding with a stern expression. I was boiling inside, but I forced myself to stay calm. I don't care what other relatives think. It's not their life. My mother's face hardened. "We're not leaving until you promise to move back. You owe us this." That line again, "you owe us." When I refused, Father started listing everything they provided for me over the years: clothes, school supplies, a roof. Then he threatened to tell extended family that I was an ungrateful daughter who turned her back on her jobless sibling. The manipulative weight of his words hung in the air. He wanted me to fear social shame so much that I'd give in. But I'd had enough. "Get out," I said, pointing to the door. Father's eyes widened. "Excuse me?" I repeated firmly. "Get out of my apartment. I'm not moving back, I'm not paying rent to you, and I'm not supporting my siblings' laziness. Now leave." They stomped out, hurling accusations of betrayal. It was a moment of victory for me, but also terrifying. I never stood up to them like that. By the time the door slammed, my heart pounded. That same night, calls and texts poured in from aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't spoken to in ages. Apparently, Father had wasted no time spreading a sob story about how I was refusing to support the family. Some relatives took my side immediately, suspecting there was more to the story. Others scolded me, saying, "How can you abandon your parents like this?" It felt like a tidal wave of judgment, all because my father twisted the narrative to paint himself as the victim. My sibling then texted me for the first time in weeks. "You're making life difficult for all of us. Just do what they want." The entitlement was off the charts. I fired back, "You're an adult. Get a job. Stop expecting me to carry you." The response was a series of insults, saying I'd become too proud and forgotten my roots. I blocked their number. In the middle of all this chaos, I realized I needed a plan to protect myself, maybe even a measure of revenge that would stop them from constantly badgering me. I talked to a friend who worked in a local advisory group and explained the situation. They mentioned that if my parents attempted anything like claiming I owed them money or tried to garnish my wages, I'd have legal grounds to refute it. The friend advised me to keep records of all communication, especially the more threatening or manipulative texts and voicemails. "Build your paper trail," they said. "If they escalate, you want to be ready to prove that you never agreed to any financial arrangement." Although I didn't think my parents would actually go that far, I didn't want to underestimate them. Around this time, I learned they were pressuring an older aunt to guilt-trip me. This aunt was known for meddling in family affairs, always siding with the traditional view that children must obey parents at all costs. She called me with a condescending tone, claiming I'd break my mother's heart if I didn't cave soon. I politely told her it wasn't her business and ended the call. But my parents still weren't done. A few days later, I got an envelope in the mail containing a typed letter, apparently from my father. He stated that if I didn't come home within 2 weeks, they'd have no choice but to see me in court for unpaid family dues. It was laughable, but also infuriating. There's no recognized legal concept in the United States that requires an adult child to pay family dues for refusing to move back. The letter was a clear scare tactic, hoping I'd fold from intimidation. That's when I decided to push back hard. I brought all my saved texts, voicemails, and the letter to a local attorney for a quick consultation. The attorney confirmed the letter was nonsense. However, they advised me to send a formal cease and desist letter to make it clear I had no intention of complying. That way, if my parents persisted in harassment, I'd have grounds to pursue legal action for harassment or defamation. Drafting that letter felt cathartic, like finally setting up a boundary that couldn't be crossed without consequences. I mailed it out, and then I waited. The following week was eerily quiet. No barrage of phone calls, no unexpected visits, nothing. I almost started to relax, thinking maybe they'd seen the legal angle and decided not to push their luck. But that hope died fast. One morning, I woke up to angry texts from my father, who had apparently just received the cease and desist letter. He called me ungrateful, disrespectful, and said I was dead to him. Among the tirade, he threatened that if I set foot in his house again, I'd face real consequences. The irony was staggering, considering he was the one who wanted me back under his roof just weeks earlier. I had an instant urge to respond in anger, but I forced myself to breathe, remember my attorney's advice, and document everything instead. My father's outburst was like handing me proof on a silver platter that I had tried to resolve this peacefully, but he continued to harass me. I decided then and there I would go no contact. That meant blocking phone numbers, ignoring emails, and telling mutual relatives that I would not engage with my parents any further. If they wanted to escalate legally, so be it. Word spread quickly among extended family that I had cut off my parents. Some relatives were shocked. Others quietly applauded me for breaking free of the toxic dynamic. My sibling tried to email me, claiming they were sorry it had come to this, but also blaming me for the entire drama. If you had just agreed, none of this would have happened, they wrote. I laughed bitterly at the audacity. That email went straight to my evidence folder. As I adjusted to my new no-contact life, something surprising happened. A cousin who lived out of state reached out, wanting to compare notes. Apparently, my parents had borrowed a significant amount of money from this cousin years ago and never repaid it. Now that cousin was hearing about how they demanded I move back and pay them, and they recognized the same pattern of entitlement. The cousin told me, they always want everyone else to fund their lifestyle. Don't give in. Emboldened by that support, I decided to enact what I consider my final form of revenge, exposing the truth to the rest of the extended family. I gathered all the harassing texts, a typed letter threatening a bogus lawsuit, and a screenshot of the cease and desist document. Then I emailed certain relatives who'd been fed lies by my parents. I made sure to keep my tone factual and calm, simply explaining the sequence of events and including attachments. The effect was profound. A few relatives who had been harshly judging me apologized and said they now understood. Others, who had always suspected my parents were manipulative, offered their sympathy. Mother and father became furious when they learned about my email. They tried to spin it as me slandering them, but the evidence was undeniable. Several family members confronted them, and they had no coherent defense. Their attempts at playing the victim collapsed under the weight of tangible proof. The greatest consequence for them, ironically, was losing the respect and trust of people who had once blindly supported them. My sibling, too, faced social consequences. Some relatives refused to lend them money or let them crash on their couches anymore, realizing this was a pattern of freeloading. Although my parents and sibling tried to retaliate with more guilt-laden rants, they saw it had little effect. Most folks now knew the truth. In the end, I successfully cut ties. My father's last message was an angry voicemail calling me a traitor to the family. My mother apparently cried to some relatives, claiming I'd ruined the family reputation. But for me, the quiet that followed was a gift. No more calls demanding I move back. No more letters threatening nonsense legal action. I felt free for the first time in years, free from the burden of their impossible expectations. Looking back, it's sad that it had to come to this. Cutting off one's own parents and sibling is no small thing. But when entitlements run so deep that they threaten to swallow your life, sometimes the only sane choice is to walk away, forever, if necessary. My revenge wasn't a dramatic courtroom showdown or a cunning trick. It was making them face the consequences of their demands and manipulations. I stood my ground. I refused their ultimatum. I exposed the truth to those who mattered. And now I'm at peace. So, am I wrong for refusing to move back home and pay rent to my own parents while supporting my jobless sibling? I don't think so. I believe every adult has the right to decide their own path, especially when the alternative is subjugating themselves to manipulative demands. If that makes me the villain in their eyes, so be it. I'd rather be a villain in their story than a prisoner under their roof.